Welcome back to Mr. Bing Watch Channel. If you watched part 1, you know the story of Daniel Mercer and how ambition consumed him from within. But you might be wondering, what comes next? Does he live forever in success? Does his conscience ever resurface? And what happens when someone from his past suddenly reappears with a confession that changes everything? This is part 2, The Reckoning. Make sure you're subscribed because this continuation will shake the very foundation of what you think you know about Daniel's story. Let's dive in. 10 years had passed since Daniel Mercer last saw Jonas Hartley's name fade from the ledger. 10 years since he'd convinced himself that Jonas had simply chosen to disappear, that the circle had merely accommodated a mutual parting. 10 years of climbing higher, recruiting more, corrupting more, always telling himself that the people who fell along the way had simply lacked the strength to survive at the top. Daniel's office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian building had become a fortress of power. From behind his mahogany desk, he orchestrated the lives of hundreds of employees, guided corporate mergers that affected thousands, and served as the de facto leader of what had evolved far beyond a college secret society. The circle had grown. It had spread beyond Harrington University into other elite institutions: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford. In every major city, in every prestigious firm and government agency, members of the circle now held positions of influence. They had a name for it now: the Ascension Network. It operated in plain sight, disguised as a mentorship program for promising young professionals. No one questioned it. No one investigated. The Circle had learned that the best way to hide the most audacious conspiracy was to make it public, to give it a respectable face, to present it as something everyone could join if they were talented enough, ambitious enough, ruthless enough. Daniel had become something between a mentor and a prophet to these new members. Young lawyers, consultants, politicians, investors, they all came to him seeking guidance, seeking the secret to rapid success, and he gave it to them, always the same way. First the promise, then the initiation, then the first small sacrifice, then the hunger that could never be satisfied. It was a Tuesday evening in March when Daniel's entire world fractured. He was in his office, reviewing files for an upcoming merger that would render several competitors obsolete and, more importantly, would eliminate thousands of jobs, when his secretary called through the intercom. "Sir, there's a visitor. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. He says his name is—" She paused, and Daniel could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "He says his name is Jonas Hartley." The files slipped from Daniel's hands. It was impossible. Completely impossible. Jonas Hartley had been erased from existence more than a decade ago, and yet when the man stepped through Daniel's office door, Daniel recognized him immediately. The same face, but aged in a way that seemed unnatural. Jonas looked like a photograph that had been exposed to sunlight too long, faded, bleached, insubstantial. His eyes were the worst part. They held no recognition, no warmth, no connection to the world. They were the eyes of someone looking out from behind glass that couldn't be broken. "Hello, Daniel," Jonas said, his voice thin and hollow. "I've been waiting 10 years to have this conversation." Daniel stood, his instinct screaming at him to call security, to deny this man entry, to erase him all over again. But something, a voice he thought he'd killed years ago, made him close the office door instead. "How is this possible?" Daniel asked. "You left. The circle did nothing to me," Jonas interrupted. And there was something in his voice that sounded like laughter, or perhaps the echo of laughter, remembered from a previous life. "That's what you've been telling yourself all these years, isn't it? That the circle has power beyond what we give it, that it's some mystical force moving through the world, orchestrating events. But that's just what Eleanor wanted you to believe. That's just what every leader of the circle wants the members to believe. It keeps you compliant. It keeps you from seeing the truth." "The truth?" Daniel felt his hands begin to tremble. "You disappeared. You were erased." Jonas walked to the window and looked out over the city. From this height, the world below seemed small and insignificant. "I didn't disappear, Daniel. I left. And yes, the circle made that difficult. Eleanor made sure I was denied opportunities, that people found reasons not to trust me, that doors closed before I could reach them. But I wasn't erased from reality. I was only erased from your collective memory. You all forgot about me because you wanted to. Because admitting I existed meant admitting that leaving the circle didn't result in supernatural punishment. It just resulted in a harder life. And knowing that the sacrifices you were making were unnecessary, that the circle's power was really just the power of complicity and silence, that was unbearable to you. Jonas, I don't. Let me tell you what happened, Jonas said, turning to face him. After I tried to leave, the circle made my life difficult. Yes, but I survived. I changed my major 3 times, transferred schools twice, eventually found my way to a small university in the Midwest. I worked as an admissions officer, then moved into education advocacy. I've had a small, quiet life. Nothing like what I would have had if I'd stayed in the circle. Nothing like what you have, Daniel. But I've slept at night. I've looked people in the eye without seeing their potential as prey. I've existed as a human being instead of as a mechanism for accumulation. Daniel sat back down heavily. Something was wrong with this narrative. If Jonas had just lived a quiet life, why come here? Why break the silence now? I came here, Jonas continued, as if reading his thoughts, because I've been hearing things, rumors about the Ascension Network, about its expansion, about how it's not just selecting ambitious young people anymore, about how it's been actively recruiting people who are specifically broken, specifically damaged, specifically vulnerable. And I realized something, Daniel. The circle doesn't just corrupt ambitious people, it actively creates them. It identifies kids with trauma, with family problems, with financial desperation, and it seduces them with the promise of power. The circle doesn't just reveal corruption that was already there, it plants it, it nurtures it, it grows it deliberately. That's not, Daniel began, but the words died in his throat because he knew it was true. He'd personally approved recruitment profiles for 3 members just this month. Each one had been specifically selected for their vulnerability. One was a brilliant young lawyer whose mother was dying and couldn't afford treatment. Another was a talented analyst whose family had been destroyed by bankruptcy. The third was a political aide whose immigrant parents had been threatened with deportation. He'd selected them precisely because their desperation would make them compliant. I didn't come here to convince you to change, Jonas continued. I know you won't. You're too far gone, Daniel. But I came here to tell you something that might keep you awake at night, the way it's kept me awake. I came here to tell you that Eleanor Rhodes died 3 months ago. The world seemed to stop. Eleanor had been like a god to Daniel, eternal, untouchable, omniscient. The idea of her being subject to death, to the same mortality as everyone else, seemed impossible. How? Daniel whispered. Cancer, Jonas said flatly. Pancreatic, very aggressive, very fast. She was diagnosed in December and dead by March. She was in the hospital when the end came, and apparently she spent her final days calling people, dozens of them, former members of the circle from across the country and around the world. She was trying to make peace with something, or warning people about something. No one seems entirely clear on what she was saying at the end. But here's the thing that you need to know, Daniel. Right before Eleanor died, she supposedly asked to see the original ledger, the one from Harrington. She wanted it brought to her hospital room, and she spent the night before her death writing something new in it, a final entry. Daniel felt his pulse accelerating. What did it say? I don't know, Jonas admitted, because the ledger disappeared. After Eleanor's death, someone removed it from the university archives. It's been gone for 72 days, and everyone in the circle is looking for it, including Eleanor's successor. Eleanor had a successor? Of course she did, Jonas said. The circle doesn't die with one person. It evolves. It adapts. Eleanor had been gradually transferring power for the last few years. Her protege is a woman named Vivienne Park. She's brilliant, ambitious, and terrifyingly innovative. She's been completely restructuring the circle's operations. She's brought in people from outside academia, corporate executives, politicians, military strategists. She's turning what used to be a selective society into something much larger, much more dangerous. Daniel's mind was spinning. He'd been so focused on his own power, his own position, that he hadn't noticed the seismic shifts happening around him. He'd been so busy recruiting and corrupting that he'd lost sight of the broader architecture. Why are you telling me this? Daniel asked. Jonas smiled, and it was the saddest thing Daniel had ever seen. Because I think you're going to figure out where the ledger is, and when you do, you're going to find Eleanor's final entry. And I think you need to know what's coming before you make a decision about whether to share that entry with Vivienne Park, or whether to destroy it, or whether to do something else entirely. What's coming? Something Eleanor was afraid of, Jonas said. I spoke to her once, after I left the circle. Years ago by accident at an airport. She was different then, not weaker, but sadder, older in a way that had nothing to do with years. She told me that she'd made a mistake when she founded the modern iteration of the Circle. She said that power wasn't the goal, but she'd lost sight of what the actual goal was supposed to be. She said that she'd been trying to build something that would transcend individual ambition, but instead she'd just created a machine for manufacturing individual ambition on a massive scale. Jonas moved toward the door. Find the ledger, Daniel. Read what Eleanor wrote, and then decide what you're going to do with the knowledge. But decide quickly, because Vivian is already restructuring the society in ways that Eleanor never would have permitted. The Circle is about to become something much darker than either of you imagined. After Jonas left, Daniel sat in silence for hours. His office seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in, the city lights beyond the windows becoming harsh and accusatory. He pulled up his encrypted email and began searching through months of correspondence. Something Jonas had said triggered a memory, a cryptic message from Eleanor, dated just before her death. He found it. If anything happens, you know where to look, the place we all began. The book holds the future now. The place they all began. Harrington University, the library, the chamber beneath the library. It took him 3 weeks to arrange the trip. He told his colleagues he was taking a vacation. He told his contacts in the Circle that he was personally conducting a strategic review. None of it was true. He was going back to the beginning because something in him, some small, desperate part that had survived his transformation into a creature of pure ambition, needed to know what Eleanor had written. The old library looked exactly the same. Older, perhaps, but unchanged in any fundamental way. Daniel walked the familiar corridors, and despite everything, he felt the echo of that desperate 19-year-old version of himself, the version that had wanted so badly to matter, to belong, to matter. The basement access was still there, more restricted now, but Daniel's position in the Circle granted him access codes that opened every door. He descended into darkness, using his phone's flashlight to guide his way. The chamber was exactly as he remembered it. The tapestries still hung on the walls. The candles were fresh, recently lit, which meant someone had been here recently. Someone was maintaining this place, keeping the symbol alive. The ledger sat on the pedestal, untouched, waiting. Daniel approached it with reverence and terror in equal measure. He opened it carefully. The pages seemed to glow in the candlelight, filled with names and dates and cryptic notes. He found his own entry from that first night. Potential for greatness, catalyst for rise, perfect subject. Then he turned to the back of the book. Eleanor's handwriting was shaky, written during her final days, but still unmistakably hers. The final entry covered 3 pages. Daniel's hands shook as he read, "To whoever reads this, I am Eleanor Rhodes, and I founded the modern Circle of Valiance in 1989 when I was a senior at Harrington University. I did so believing that I was creating something noble, a society dedicated to excellence, to merit, to the principle that the most capable should rise to power. But I was 22 years old and profoundly naive. Over 30 years, I have watched the Circle grow, evolve, and corrupt. I have watched brilliant, idealistic young people become calculating machines. I have watched them sacrifice their peers, their values, their humanity on the altar of ambition. And I have done nothing to stop it. Instead, I have enabled it. I have celebrated it. I have institutionalized it. The Circle does not select the best among us. It selects the hungriest. It selects those willing to do anything to rise. And in doing so, it doesn't uncover hidden corruption. It creates it. It manufactures moral compromise. It is an engine for the systematic production of people who have traded their souls for success. But here is what I have discovered in my final days, as I face the mortality I have for so long denied. There is no such thing as a soul that can be traded, as if it were separate from the self. When we compromise our values, when we sacrifice others for our own advancement, we do not lose a soul. We become a different person entirely. We amputate parts of ourselves that cannot grow back. To my successor, Vivian Park, I say this: the Circle is not a stepping stone to greater things. It is a destination. It is the end of the road. Every member who joins will find themselves becoming gradually less human. The hunger will never be satisfied. The power will never be enough. The success will never feel like success. They will spend their lives climbing a ladder that has no top. I have asked that this final entry be written not to warn the Circle's members, but to ask them one question: what if there is another way? What if instead of climbing the ladder alone, stepping on others to reach the top, we could imagine a world where success does not require sacrifice, where ambition does not require corruption, where we could rise without making others fall. I will not live to see if such a world is possible. But I'm asking the person reading this to consider whether the life they have chosen, the power they have accumulated, the people they have hurt, the compromises they have made, was worth it. Not in terms of money or status or recognition, but in terms of their own humanity. The circle has made me powerful. It has also made me empty. I am dying with more than I could ever spend and less than I truly need. I am asking you not to follow the same path. This is not a warning. This is an apology. And perhaps, if you are fortunate, it might be an invitation to something different. Daniel closed the book. His hands were covered in tears he didn't remember shedding. He sat there in the candlelit chamber for hours, Eleanor's words echoing through his mind. Everything he'd built, everything he'd become, had just been called into question by a dead woman who'd had the luxury of moral awakening only at the very end of her life. A dead woman who'd had the courage to apologize when it no longer mattered, when no one but her successor would read her words. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt ice spread through his veins. Hello, Daniel. Vivian here. I know what you're doing. I know where you are. I know about Eleanor's final entry. We need to talk. When you're finished with your sentimental journey, come to my office. We have much to discuss about the Circle's future. V. Daniel understood then that the game had changed. The rules he'd operated under for the past decade were no longer relevant. Vivian wasn't Eleanor. She didn't believe in gradualism or subtlety. She was someone entirely new, and she had taken control of something far more dangerous than any of them had previously imagined. He made a decision in that basement, a decision that would define not his success, but his humanity. He photographed every page of Eleanor's final entry with his phone. Then, carefully, he began to tear the pages from the ledger. Eleanor's words were on his phone now, backed up to a secure cloud server. They couldn't erase them. They couldn't make them disappear. The truth would survive. But the original ledger, the physical symbol of the Circle's power, the book where names were written and erased, where members became real and disappeared, that, Daniel decided, should remain hidden. Hidden, but not destroyed. Hidden, but available to those who might someday need it. He carefully concealed the ledger in a sealed compartment behind one of the stone walls, accessible only if you knew exactly where to look. Then he erased the path to the chamber on his phone's location history. He left the underground room exactly as he'd found it, with no evidence that anyone had been there. When he emerged into the sunlight, Daniel Mercer was a different man than the one who had descended. Not better, necessarily, but different, changed, aware. He drove to Vivian Park's office, a sleek high-rise in Boston's financial district. Her office was on the top floor, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. Vivian herself was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 35, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog everything about you in a single glance. She offered him a seat and a drink. He refused both. "You know what Eleanor wrote," Daniel said. "I know she had a crisis of conscience at the end," Vivian replied, her voice amused. "I know she's asked you to question your choices, but tell me, Daniel, is that really what you want to do? Question the choices that have brought you everything?" "Eleanor was afraid of you," Daniel said, "of what you're planning." "Eleanor was afraid of change," Vivian corrected. "She built something beautiful and then became afraid of its potential. I'm not afraid. I'm excited. The Circle is about to enter its next phase. We're moving beyond universities, beyond mentorship, beyond the subtle manipulation of systems. We're about to reshape the fundamental architecture of power in this country." Daniel felt something harden in his chest. "And how do you plan to do that?" "By scaling up what already works," Vivian said. "We have members in Congress, in the judiciary, in the Pentagon, in the C-suite of every major corporation. Imagine what we could accomplish if we stopped acting as individuals and started acting as a unified network. Imagine the laws we could pass, the elections we could influence, the world we could shape to match our vision of excellence and merit." "Fascism dressed up as meritocracy," Daniel said quietly. "Efficiency dressed up as morality," Vivian countered. "All systems of power are built on some form of exclusion, Daniel. The Circle is simply honest about it. We select who rises. We decide who leads. We determine the shape of society. Others do the same thing, but they hide it behind rhetoric about democracy and justice. At least we're honest with ourselves." Daniel stood. "You're wrong, and Eleanor knew you were wrong. That's why she wrote that final entry. That's why she tried to warn you. Where is the ledger? Vivian asked, her voice suddenly cold. Safe, Daniel replied, and that's where it will stay. Eleanor's final words are in the hands of people who need to read them, and they will, Vivian. Everyone in the circle will eventually know that Eleanor had doubts, that she questioned whether this path was worth it. Vivienne stood as well. You're making a very serious mistake, Daniel. The circle doesn't tolerate defection. I'm not defecting, Daniel said. I'm testifying. There's a difference. He left her office before she could respond. As he walked through Boston's streets, his phone began to ring. Calls from circle members he'd recruited, from corporate contacts, from politicians he'd helped into office. News was spreading fast. Daniel Mercer, one of the circle's most powerful members, had broken ranks. Over the next week, he worked with journalists, lawyers, and investigators. He gave them the recordings from Eleanor's hospital room that Jonas had somehow obtained. He provided documents detailing the Ascension Network's operations. He identified members in government and business who were advancing the circle's interests. He testified before federal investigators about illegal activities, corruption, and systematic manipulation. It wasn't enough to destroy the circle entirely. Organizations like that don't die easily, but it was enough to bring scrutiny, enough to slow its expansion, enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of people who'd never questioned whether their success came at too high a price. And on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after he'd read Eleanor's final entry, Daniel received a package. Inside was a handwritten letter. Daniel, if you're reading this, then you made a choice. I spent my entire life believing you wouldn't have the courage to make it. I spent my entire life being afraid of men like you. Men with the ambition to reach the top, the ruthlessness to stay there, and the cowardice to pretend there was no other way. But you've shown me that I was wrong. You've shown me that even at the precipice, even at the height of power, it's possible to choose differently. I hope that my death, if not my life, has meant something. I hope you can forgive yourself for what you did before you changed. I hope you can help others see that the circle doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a door, and you can choose which side of the door you want to stand on. Eleanor. Daniel wept when he read those words. Not because Eleanor had forgiven him, but because she'd offered him something he'd thought was lost forever, the possibility of redemption. But as he folded the letter and placed it carefully in a drawer, a new thought occurred to him. A terrible thought that no redemption could quite erase. Somewhere in offices and universities and government buildings across the country, young people were receiving black envelopes with gold embossing. Young people with potential and hunger and desperation were being invited into chambers where promises were made and prices were extracted. The circle had been exposed, yes, but it had not been destroyed. It had simply adapted. It had become more careful, more subtle, more selective. And Daniel Mercer knew with absolute certainty that no matter what he had done to atone for his crimes, the institution that had corrupted him was already corrupting others. The hunger he had felt was being recreated, cultivated, weaponized. And somewhere, a version of himself was being born right now, a version that had not yet learned that power always comes with a price, a version that believed success was worth any sacrifice. The circle, Daniel understood at last, was not an organization that could be defeated. It was an idea, and ideas, once they take root in the human heart, are nearly impossible to kill. They just find new hosts, new bodies, new vessels to contain their terrible, seductive truth. So if you're watching this, I want you to understand something crucial. The story of Daniel Mercer doesn't end with redemption. It ends with the recognition that some mistakes can't be fixed, some harms can't be healed. And the circle, in all its forms, will continue to exist as long as there are people willing to believe that greatness requires sacrifice, that power justifies means, that success is worth any price. Don't trust the members of a secret society. But more importantly, don't trust yourself if you ever feel the hunger that Daniel felt. Don't trust the seductive voice that whispers you deserve better. Don't trust the envelope that appears under your door. Because the circle doesn't just corrupt people, it convinces them that corruption is enlightenment, that cruelty is merit, that the worst part of themselves is actually the best part, finally set free. Like this video, subscribe for more stories as we continue to bring you more enjoyable stories.